A very wonderful Sunday evening, afternoon to each and every one of you out there. We, of course, hope that you are maintaining your highest and most comfortable level of physical, spiritual, and mental health, and that you are all doing well. And we sincerely thank you for joining us this Sunday for this extremely important topic that we will be addressing over the next hour: African women's health within the capitalist system. And as always, we start by acknowledging the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere and our African ancestors. And today I want to just let you know that a little earlier I wrote and posted an article on my personal blog, Drama Umi's Truth Challenge, a better world.me. And it's entitled Denying Africa DNA Tests and White Supremacy. And, when I say honoring the indigenous people and our African ancestors, there's this really sad thing happening in African communities today where all these people who have PhDs from watching YouTube are saying that, we have always been indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. And this is so incredibly disrespectful to the actual indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. I'm talking about the people who identify themselves as natives, as Indians, as Chicanos, Mexicanos, all of those folks who are indigenous to this hemisphere. It's so disrespectful to them, as well as to our African ancestors who we have such a proud African history, you all. And the only problem with our history is that most of us do no study of it. And because we don't have any study of it, we don't understand anything about it. And we feel like we have to make up things to compensate for what we don't know, when all we have to do is do the work and we can find out the proud history that we possess. So we honor the indigenous people who are fighting for their land back, as they should. This is their land. They should have it. They should have the ability to govern their lives in healthy ways through this land. And they will never be able to have that as long as this empire exists on top of their land. So we stand in complete solidarity with them getting their land back, period. And we, of course, recognize and honor our ancestors. And a little different of a format today. Generally, we should be able to do a much better job looking at comments that come in. Shakura is not a person on social media. So since normally our format is I'm doing the latter end of these workshops, it's difficult for me to do that and look at comments. So today, since she will be doing the bulk of the presentation, and that will probably be the case for the coming weeks, then that'll allow me to be able to read whatever you all write in there and to share some of that. So we're excited to have you here for African women's health within the capitalist system. And we just start, as we always do, by some brief introductions. Jamu is speaking to you right now, organizer for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the organization that sponsors these weekly workshops. And I've done work for the party all over the world, mostly in Africa and in this country. And also we have Shakura here, my daughter, amazing daughter who grew up in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute, and of course still works within the APRP today. She is on the verge of completing her doctorate, which would make her the first doctor in our family in communication public health around women's health issues. So she's going to handle the bulk of the presenting this month, since this is her specific area of focus in her academic as well as her activist life. And then just to give you a perspective, the All African People's Revolutionary Party has a specific objective, and that objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa, one unified socialist Africa. We believe that Pan-Africanism is the solution to our problems in the world. And as Kwame Nkrumah said, until Africa is free, we don't believe any African anywhere on earth will ever be free. And in the book you see on the right, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, Nkrumah lays out the strategy in that book for how we achieve Pan-Africanism. And that strategy is we unite on the ground, on a grassroots level, with all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa. And through that, we create one body, the All-African Committee for Political Coordination. And that body's objective is to facilitate the work to run these vicious thugs, these multinational capitalists, out of Africa and reclaim our mother and our continent for ourselves. Someone asked me yesterday, they said, boy, you're really protective of Africa. I'm like, that's my mother. That's my mama. I'm extremely protective. You better not say anything about my mama around me. I mean, I love my biological mama too, but I understand that all of our mother, whether we acknowledge it or not, is Africa. And I'm talking about African people, because a lot of other people, a lot of Europeans like, well, we're all from Africa, but you being here today has nothing to do with Africa. Africa has no impact on your life. Whereas the only reason why I'm sitting where I'm sitting right now, the only reason why I'm speaking English, the only reason why I'm dealing with the trauma I've dealt with my whole life is because of the colonization of Africa. So it's a totally different thing to say that we're African people, and then for people to say, well, we all started from Africa. That's night and day. So here you have the logos of the organizations that exist today that are on the ground throughout Africa, some of them, not all of them, just as many as we could fit on the page, who accept the definition of one unified socialist Africa. And we work closely with all these organizations. I've worked with them myself individually, each and every one, and continue to do so. And we will continue to build our fighting force. And we have chapters all over the world with other liberation movements, the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, the Irish Republican Socialist National Liberation Movement, Filipino National Liberation Movement, of course, the movement for the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. So with that little switch today, I'm gonna get us started, and then I will turn it over to Shakura. So where we start first is just in talking about mortality rates for women throughout Africa today, mortality rates. And what we mean by mortality rates are, when do our women, how long do they live? What is the quality of life in the time span that they exist on the planet Earth? Okay, and how does that connect with women identifying people all over the world? You know, what's the standard for that? How does that, and if there are disparities, what are the reasons for those disparities? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And the first thing I want to call your attention to is, according to the World Health Organization, in 2018, women in Africa accounted for 533 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. So for every 100,000 live births that happened in Africa in 2018, 533 of those women did not survive that process. If you look at that, women in Africa account for 68% of all maternal deaths in the world today. So, you know, we are more than 2/3 of the women who die from maternal mortality are women in Africa, which is unacceptable, of course. The United Nations and the African Union primarily cite, if you go and study what they're talking about in relationship to this issue, they cite a lack of education, quote unquote, as the leading cause of this unfortunate reality. And, you know, we would say that the problem is not a lack of education. The problem is the exploitation of Africa and the impact that that's had on every African, particularly women identifying Africans. Because this exploitation of Africa has created the conditions where we have the richest resources in the world, but we don't have access to them. We don't benefit from them. So most of the poverty in the world exists in Africa, or at least the highest degree of poverty, I should say. And so that prevents our women identifying people from having the resources they need to ensure that their health is prioritized. So this is not an issue of lack of education. This is an issue of capitalism and imperialism. And then, according also to the United Nations and the African Union in 2018, women in Africa accounted for 243 of the overall deaths for every 1,000 women And this is just general mortality rates, not just specific to maternity. 243 out of every 1,000 women in Africa don't live after a certain period of time. And usually we're talking about in their 30s is what we're talking about. And this is compared to here in the US, where there's one woman for every 1,000 women dies through the same mortality rate comparison. And I think, you know, if you look at indigenous women in this hemisphere, the rates are oftentimes worse than even for African women, and certainly, you know, trending along the same line. So all of this that we're saying, you could apply that to indigenous women as well. And then women in Africa have been having children and living for hundreds of thousands of years, of course, right? I mean, we know that, you know, they say life started in Africa, and we know that organized social existence of human beings has been in existence a minimum of 250,000 years, right? So clearly this problem can't just be education, you know, because we haven't had for that entire period of time a problem with mortality rates. This has been a relatively recent phenomenon since colonialism has dominated Africa, as I mentioned previously. So we're talking about a system where profit is more important than people. We're talking about a system that has one doctor for every 10,000 people in most parts of Africa. We're talking about a reality where women identifying people just simply are not in the situation where their health can be prioritized. And if you add on top of that, the political and economic conditions in Africa, where the bulk of the labor that holds the foundation of making the society move falls on the women identifying folks like it does in every part of the world, then the tremendous amount of physical, mental, and spiritual stress on women, coupled with the lack of ability to have access to healthcare resources. This, we know, is the reason why we have this level of mortality rate issue on the African continent. And then finally, we know that, you know, women in Africa suffer greatly from this oppressive reality that I just spoke of. And while African women in the US don't have the same level of intense struggle that you find in Africa, African women in the US are still widely disproportionately impacted, as Shakur is going to talk more about, by this phenomenon. And again, that would also apply to indigenous women here in this hemisphere. And now I'll turn it over to Shakur.
Okay, thank you so much, Daddy. I hope you all are hanging in there as best as you can. I can't even begin to express to you how significantly important this topic is, especially because we live in a patriarchal society. Also, because sexism is such a dangerous weapon in terms of devaluing women identifying people. And I also just want to make sure to point out that we really don't focus too much on oppression and people of color. As my dad alluded to, Indigenous people have even worse mortality health outcomes when it comes to being measured and having resources that they need for various reasons. But colonialism, capitalism, and exploitation would be the main ones that I would target as the continuing problem for that. And it goes without saying that there isn't even a way to give them the help that they need, because the system is so backwards, it doesn't value them. Their health was never a priority from the moment that their land was stolen to the exchange of yellow pox and small fever and the raping of women identifying people. So I just want us to continue to think about how this is not specific to African women. This is specific to many, many different women identifying. And I think that whether you are a man identifying, whether you are a woman identifying, if you're non-binary, however you identify yourself, you should continue to think about these issues, because guess what? Even if you yourself are not a woman identifying person, you know someone in your family who I guarantee you is impacted by this in some way, shape, or form. So I'm not just talking about women identifying people who have died from mortality, because you may not know a woman identifying person who's died, but I guarantee you, you know a woman identifying person who has been explicitly oppressed when it comes to them identifying their health, when it comes to them advocating for their health, and when it comes to them seeking resources. unfortunately, that disparity is the common denominator of all women identifying people. So whether you yourself have experienced it or you know someone, I guarantee you, you mark my words on that, because this is just too common. And this is, again, based on patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism. It's always those 6 things. If you're ever unsure about why problems exist in the world, always go to capitalism first. And then from there, start to study colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and other isms. And then I guarantee you'll find your answer. The road always leads back to capitalism. Okay. So on that note, let's dig a little bit deeper into how this all started and where it all came about. Okay. So I want us to keep in mind that we first have to understand that when Africans were kidnapped and brought over to Jamaica and the United States and parts of South America, Costa Rica, all these places that Africans now currently exist, we did not experience humane treatment. And I know we all know that, but I want to be very explicit in addressing my ancestors who were raped on a daily basis. We need to acknowledge that. And we don't even know all of their names. So the fact that they went through what they went through so that I could be standing here today, it makes me want to break out in tears, because I can't even begin to imagine how scared they must have felt and how desensitized they probably had to behave, because if they showed too much emotion, they might be killed or beaten or raped even more. So it's like, how do you just get over this so that this man identifying person can leave you be, so that you can try to have some type of sense of self-worth, even if the person who just raped you doesn't have to value that. And then that leads into this unconsented experimentation. So for a lot of women identifying people, you all are familiar with pap smears, right? Anybody who has an OBGYN, an obstetrician, gynecologist is familiar with this idea of pap smear. Now, the whole purpose of pap smears is to prevent cervical and in some cases ovarian cancer, right? That's the basis. Even if you don't even know what a pap smear is, that's basically what that is, or at least that's what they teach us to understand. But what I need you to understand is the quote unquote father of gynecology, aka Marion Sims. A couple of seminars back, my dad explained to you that the only reason you get a park named after you or an elementary school is because you raped some indigenous people, you stole their land, or you kidnapped Africans, and now you have all this glory and fame. Well, Marion Sims is no exception to that rule. He's literally labeled as the father of gynecology. Why, you may ask? Because he made his living off of doing unconsented experimentation on who? You guessed it, African slaves, okay? And I want to explicitly say unconsented, and then had the nerve to document the fact that we were strong and we experienced pain very well. That's where that whole BS ideology came from, that we don't have pain, African women don't experience pain. We have high pain tolerances. That's where that BS came from, because he had notes that are publicly available, by the way, so you can research it yourself, where he's talking about how one person, case study number 2, literally had her clitoris removed, y'all, okay? I just need you to understand the severity of the situation, okay? Had her clitoris removed, and then he documented how she behaved after this experiment took place, okay? And then he would travel to different plantations and just pick who he wanted to work with. He was in cahoots with the plantation master. He probably paid him, or maybe he didn't, because whatever, it doesn't matter. And then that's how gynecology came to be known. As I said, he's the father for a reason, okay? So this is where pap smears and the tools that they use to expand your cervix, that's where all of that came from, was the research that he did on African women and probably on indigenous women, but unfortunately I couldn't find that research, okay? So I just want us to be very clear that that's where that came from. And that's where the idea of pain came from, and the acceptance of pain being a high tolerance. That's where all of that came from, all right? We also need to think about that how that came to be, that has built this lineage for misinformed information. So we're talking about when you do go to talk to your doctor, how your doctor has all these implicit biases, these racial standpoints of how your doctor is already perceiving you to be able to deal with pain. Doctors are more likely to not listen to African women because of X, Y, and Z reasons. But the basis of that comes from Marion Sims and his research. The basis of that comes from we don't have value in this system. The basis of that comes from the fact that we are not considered important enough to advocate about our own bodies, which we have had for 33, 48 plus years, but we don't know what we're talking about. Okay. And so then trying to understand, how do we still advocate for ourselves in a system that is constantly oppressing us? That is the question of the hour. How do you get humane treatment when the system you live in is based off of inhumanity? How does that happen? That's rhetorical. The basis of that is that you need to deconstruct all the systems that are perpetuating that oppression in the first place. So, on those same lines, I want us to think about some of our ancestors who we may or may not even be familiar with. So, let's take Henrietta Lacks, for example. Henrietta Lacks saves thousands of people. And you all probably don't even know who she is. I just learned about her 3 years ago. Okay. So Henrietta Lacks basically went in for a pap smear. She knew that something was going on with her body. She couldn't really tell what it was, but she knew there was a problem. The doctor diagnosed her as having cervical cancer. But what they did, just like they've done with Tuskegee men, just like they've done with indigenous people, just like they've done with Jewish people, just like they've done with other people, differently abled, mentally retarded people, they've done it for years. They will continue to do it. They are doing it right now, is stealing information from patients or stealing cells, more specifically, biological cells. Yes, you heard me correctly, because her particular cells, even though she developed cancer, had the ability to regenerate and regrow. And so what they did was they said, let's try to see if we can use her cells to develop treatment options for diseases that we haven't been able to, quote unquote, find cures for yet. And that's why I said she saved thousands of people, because her cells were able to develop treatment options for diseases such as polio, to give you an example. Okay. So, of course, her family never got any acknowledgement for that. Her family didn't even know until 40 years after it had happened. The same thing with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And by then, the men had already been injected with syphilis. Don't let anybody tell you they weren't, because they were. Okay. I went to Tuskegee. I took research classes. I studied in the building where the syphilis experiment took place. Okay, so I know what I'm talking about. These men were injected with syphilis, and what the doctors did was they sat back and they watched, because they knew the men would then go to their houses and be intimate with their partners, which means that the syphilis is spreading. Okay, so even when the cure for syphilis came out, it still wasn't introduced to these men. So I just need us to understand this is not an accident. This has been happening for years, but the problem is there's more information out there for man identifying unethical treatments than there are for women identifying. And we need to continue to shine light on that. We need to continue to shine light on that, because you're not going to be able to deconstruct oppression if you only deconstruct it for man identifying people who are African descent. You need to deconstruct for everyone, because that's really how you build a socialist world, when you are acknowledging that anyone who is oppressed should not have to deal with that anymore. And then just on that same note, I just want us to think about other cases where that has happened. So I mentioned our Jewish brothers and sisters. I talked about our indigenous people being raped and assaulted, injected with smallpox. These are just small examples. I could go on and on. We know that people who are currently identifying as prisoners have unethical treatments being done to them all the time. Whenever there's a new drug on the market, the FDA will select certain prisoners and inject them with that. These are just the facts, y'all. These are just the facts, because anybody who doesn't have value in this country is expendable. That's basically what that boils down to. And from a white supremacy standpoint, they would rather have people who are expendable be the pawns, if you're a chess player, so that they can die out first, so that we can really protect the people who matter, which is people in power who typically are of European or white descent. Next slide, please. Okay, so on that same note, let's dig a little bit more into this, okay? So I want us to continue to think about, my dad made an excellent point, how he said, even though who is identifying that lack of education is the cause for that, that's not the cause. The cause is capitalism that doesn't value people of African descent, indigenous people, things like that. So as we continue to think about that, I'm going to help shave a little bit more into that. Okay, I want to sharpen that a little bit more. So what is it about capitalism that makes it hard for African women to receive treatment that they are deserving of? Well, lack of resources. There are plenty of studies out there that indicate that if you study WIC, so women, infant, and children clinics, if you study low income clinics that are in neighborhoods that are predominantly African or predominantly indigenous, but you know that they're low income because they're quote unquote in the ghetto, if you will, or maybe they are quote unquote majority of the people living there identify as low income, meaning they make below a certain amount of income per year. You want to start to think about what the treatment options look like for them. So let's say if we take a very affluent city, so no matter where you are in the world, you know that you have an area of town that is quote unquote not so safe, right, for racist white supremacy standpoints. And I want you to go to that clinic in that neighborhood that has stigma attached to it, because most of the people that live there don't make enough money, or they might be unemployed, or they might not have jobs at all. Maybe the working class has not been able to benefit them because they lost their job for many reasons. Okay. So you go visit that clinic, and let's say you're going because you need to get something as simple as a pap smear done, okay? Or maybe if you're a man identifying, you need to go get a prostate exam, okay? So you go to this low income clinic and you get serviced and you get treated there. And then I want you to go back to your car or your bus or however you got to the first clinic. And I want you to go to an affluent neighborhood that does have resources, that is not low income, completely opposite. And I want you to go in for the same medical concern. Whatever you went in for the first treatment, go in for the second one, and take a look at how different your experience is going to be. So what I mean specifically is providers are literally trained to treat people badly in low income clinics. These are published studies, y'all. I'm not just making this up because I'm an African woman identifying person. These are published studies where people have researched this. And the perception is if you A, are low income, B, don't have insurance, or C, have insurance, but it's considered public versus private insurance, you are more likely to be treated badly. Okay. So I want you to ask yourself, who tends to fit into that category of having low income, no insurance, or maybe if they do, they have public insurance? 9 times out of 10, that's Indigenous people. 9 times out of 10, that's African people. There is a small percentage of African people who A, have insurance, and B, have private insurance. And even then, they're not guaranteed to have better care, but private insurance people are more likely to be treated better than public insurance people, because public insurance people have stigmas attached to them because they don't deserve the fair treatment for whatever reason, backwards as it may be. So that's where that lack of resources comes from, because capitalism has already said you're not contributing to make more money for other people. So you don't get to have healthy outcomes because you don't make any money, or because you're not contributing to this input output system. That also means that you're going to have issues when it comes to experiencing how you talk to your provider, because providers, as I just said, based on their teachings from Marion Sims, have been taught that you don't have value. So that's why they chart African women as saying non-compliant or unlikely to follow prescription, when they're not even asking this person, why did you have issues coming to your appointment today? It's not that she's non-compliant if she identifies as she. It's not, it might be because transportation was an issue. It might be because this person is working 3 shifts and was barely able to get off to take off time for that doctor appointment, if they had the ability to take time off, because a lot of times that's non-negotiable, because you can't not make money just to go to the doctor. So you have to put your health on the back burner as usual, because that is the role of the African woman, so that you can still keep the lights on, or you can still keep breastfeeding, or you can still formula feed, or whatever your thing is that your family needs you to do, and they need your money to go to that. You can't afford to take time off. So instead of labeling this person as non-compliant, doctors really should be more humane and talk to them and say, what are some of the challenges that you face that make it very hard for you to value your health? But that's what happens in a socialist environment. That is not what happens in a capitalist environment. As my dad just stated to you, there's 1 doctor for every 1,000 patients. So how's the doctor going to be able to have that actual dialogue when we're talking about maybe a 20, 25-minute exchange at least with each patient? Doctors don't have that kind of time, because patients are money, and money is profit. And you can't slow down if you can't make profit. That's just the bottom line. You got to make profit, got to make profit. So you get in and you get out. You get the patient in and you get the patient out. No matter if the patient didn't get all their questions answered, no matter if the patient is scared and has never been able to sit down and talk to a doctor before, no matter if the patient is in excruciating pain and could be developing something that could be life-threatening. All those things don't matter, because it's all about making money, right? So we're thinking about that. With racism comes these racist practices that come in. So as I said, I've literally had providers say to me, you need to be more mindful of X, Y, and Z. And I just think that that's really interesting, because they know nothing about my life. They know nothing about what I study. They know nothing about me as a person. They just already labeled me in the first 2.5 seconds that I walked into the room. And I am the kind of patient where I do want to ask questions. I am the kind of patient where I want to understand. I have a learning disability. So I have to ask more questions, because I process things differently than the average person. But do you think any of that comes across their mind in terms of humane treatment? No, they don't have to think about any of those things. So that makes it that much more complicated for me, because I'm trying to advocate those things to them and they're cutting me off because they're not listening. There are also studies that are published that suggest that If you don't say what you need to say in the first 18 seconds of your visit, your provider will cut you off and assume that they know why you were there visiting them. So it's very dangerous when it comes to someone who is being vulnerable and trying to open up, but scared or concerned or whatever the case may be. And by the time they are able to actually articulate what they're saying, those 18 seconds have passed. And the provider has already thought about how they need to be moving on to the next patient. This is a serious problem, you all. And we haven't even gotten to the gist of where the mortality actually comes from. Right now, we're just talking about what it means to get your foot in the door, which is why a lot of Africans don't even want to be bothered going to the doctor. It makes sense. Why would you ridicule yourself and put yourself against all of that? Why would you do that knowing that that's going to be the outcome? You might as well stay at home and do self-care. Stay at your house, sorry, because home is Africa. You might as well stay at your house and do self-care. So just continue to think about that. Continue to think about all these things. And so, just as we continue to move into that, that means that because access to care is really not that, it's not access to care, okay? Then that means that this problem, whatever the reason is, this woman identifying person was going in to begin with, this problem is not being addressed. If this person doesn't trust their provider, then the problem's not going to be addressed. If the person doesn't feel respected, the problem's not going to be addressed. If the person experiences racial experiences or communication dysfunction, the problem is not going to be addressed. That's just the bottom line. And as you continue to think about that, how frustrating must that be for that person who knows that they're not being valued, they're not being listened to, which means what's the point of that? They might as well just try to figure it out on their own. Okay. And then just continuing to, of course, acknowledge that we have sexism that we need to deal with. We have patriarchy, we have toxic masculinity. These are all things that fit into that narrative. All right. So just real quick, this sister we have on the right, this is Dr. Shalon Irving. May she rest in peace. Unfortunately, she died 3 weeks after giving birth. This is just one case study that I want to talk to you about tonight. Her baby is healthy and fine, to my knowledge, and the grandmother is now raising her baby. But her pregnancy was okay. She had a couple of complications and went in, asked to speak to a doctor, was telling the doctor that she was feeling some hemorrhaging and things like that. Doctor said that she was quote unquote over exaggerating and said, it might just be stress, and just kind of blew her off, asked her to go back to her house. She came back to her house, and there's a video floating around of her mother actually telling this story. Okay. So the mother is telling the story saying, Dr. Irving came back in and told mom, I can't breathe. I'm having a hard time breathing. And so mom asked her to sit down on the couch and said, just take a deep breath if you can. I'm here. And then she said, maybe about 12 seconds later, her daughter passed out. And of course, by the time they got to the hospital, it was too late. She had already passed, and the baby was already 3 weeks old by then. So as we continue to think about the definition of mortality, it's not just limited to being pregnant. It's not limited to giving birth. It could even happen postpartum, after the baby has been born and brought into this world. Okay. And that's a great example of what I just said. And as my dad said, my dad mentioned that education is not the issue. Just so we're clear, not that education is everything, but this sister definitely did some research, because she had a bachelor's degree, she had 2 master's degree, and she had a dual PhD degree. Okay. And it doesn't matter, but I just also want to put out there, she literally worked in the maternal and child health division at the CDC. Okay. So the CDC is a corporate racist entity. I'm not saying that the CDC is the end all be all, but I am saying that she is working with women identifying every single day, and working with children and studying things like maternal mortality, studying things like infant mortality. And yet this is happening to her. So you have to understand that at some point, it's not education. At some point, it's just racism and it's capitalism. That's the bottom line. Because you can't tell me that couldn't have happened to her. Who else could that have happened to? This person is working in the community. You got to be kidding me right now. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we continue to move forward, I want us to also start to think about what does this mean in terms of how we can really start to address this? Because we can't have African women dying anymore. I personally, if you haven't heard it by now, am very passionate about this topic, because I do not have children yet. And I am terrified to conceive in this country for X number of reasons. But this presentation should give you a good indicator of why I feel that. I am absolutely terrified. And I do want to become a mother, but the idea of dying while I'm giving birth, I got to tell you, it scares me. And so until I know for sure that might not happen to me, I'm not in a rush at all, because right now I value my life so that I can continue to do this work and give back to my ancestors. So First, we have to start with being able to do research in a work study type of fashion so that we can talk about these issues with other people. So as we've said to you before, you join work study, you have an explicit list of books, readings that you do. And as you're doing these readings, you're communicating with other people who are assigned the same number of pages as you to read so that you all can bounce ideas off of each other, have discussions based off of whoever is facilitating for that particular meeting. And then they offer you questions, discussion questions, if you will, so that you can talk more about these issues. So some of that means reading some of these case studies. Some of that means reading some of these articles about African women who were dying, but yet had no issue with education or had no issue with being able to articulate and advocate for themselves, but yet they still passed away. So political education is always going to be number one. And I would encourage you to go out and do research. But as we said before, that's a slippery slope, because if you're just researching for yourself, this issue affects all of us, as I said before. So that means you need to be discussing it with other people. You can't just read about this yourself. You need to be talking to as many people as you can so that more information can be exchanged and more opportunities and possibilities to deconstruct the isms can be exchanged so that we can be organized as a united front. Because the more people we have on deck to talk about these things, the more informed people will be. The more informed people will be, the more organized we'll be. The more organized we'll be, the more mass united will be, so that we really can take back our continent and give this land back to the indigenous people and help ourselves understand that we don't need any more African women to die. These are preventable causes for the most part. There's like a 0.3% that are just not preventable. So we pay homage to those. But for the most part, we can stop this. It starts with organization, and it really starts with political education from a work study discussion-based system, okay? That also means being able to talk about some of the things that are causing some of these things and opening up our minds to understanding it's not just these things that we say in terms of education or income. That's a small part of it. But why are people not educated? Because of capitalism. Because they should be able to go to school and get educated. But a lot of people can't afford to do that because tuition is literally so expensive. And for people who are losing their jobs left and right because of COVID, but also before COVID, that makes it really hard for them to send their kids to be educated. Very, very hard. And they shouldn't even have to pay for that, because these people are going to go around, go get educated, come back and put that information back into the community anyway, which means they shouldn't have to pay for that, because to me, the trade-off should be, you know, that you're getting this information so that you can make the world better. That's what I'm planning to do. That's the only reason I'm getting a doctorate degree. You hear my dad say every weekend that I'm going to be the first in my family. That's really important to me. But to be honest with you, this is my dissertation topic, what we're talking about tonight. So being able to set an example for my family is very important to me. But I really want to get my work published so that people can read about African women dying. That's so important to me, because African women don't need to die. Like, duh, let's fix that, okay? Because we matter. And as I said, I'm personally invested, but I'm also thinking about my other women identifying colleagues who are being killed, literally, because their voices are not being heard. That's unacceptable to me, unacceptable by every means. So I want to try to continue to think about ways that we can address that. And so that looks like, whether you're man identifying, whether you're woman identifying, that looks like you supporting groups. You've heard my dad say before, he does not identify as LGBTQ. He does not identify as a woman, but yet he goes to these marches and supports LGBTQ brothers and sisters, non-binary people. He goes to these marches and supports women identifying people. So that means asking you to step out of your comfort zone. That's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to do some political education and start to build some type of organization around topics like this that you may not have always been interested in studying. Because as I said, it does affect you in some way, shape, or form. Okay, we're not being selfish and we're not just being individualistic. We're thinking about topics that affect all of us, because as a collective, we all need to rise up and be better and have healthier outcomes. Okay, no matter what our race, class, or gender may be. So as we continue to think about that, that means you stepping out of your comfort zone and going to entities where you might be able to engage with more people who are doing this kind of research from a political education standpoint. And then the last thing I would say was, use our ancestors, use the tools that they have given us. Think about what we have done for thousands of years based in Africa. And if you need some help with that, I'd be more than happy to talk about that in the next slide, please. Okay, so, and I'm sorry, I meant to acknowledge my sister who has fallen, but on that previous slide, her name was Kira Johnson. And that's just another case study. Had her first child, no issue at all. Second child had a C-section emergency, went back to the recovery room. Her partner noticed her bleeding from the C-section, advocated on her behalf. The doctors did nothing. She bled for 8 hours. Did you all hear me? I said she bled for 8 hours. So cause of death was her bleeding out and not being able to get help sooner after the baby was born. Okay. So again, that's just so unacceptable to me. I hope I'm not like, I don't understand that at all. But anyways, okay. So these are some tools to help you figure out how to do this. If you're still not sure, how do you go about deconstructing oppressions for other groups that you may not identify with? So I think first it starts with you doing more research on some of the African foundational practices that Africans have been doing for centuries. So that means adopting a house birth or a home birth, if you will. Okay. So we know that the system is corrupt. We know that the system is based on profit. It's based on money. It's not based on humane treatment. So that means not necessarily going to an entity, a hospital, that would support your ability to seek humane treatment. Hospitals are not interested in what works for you. They're interested in doing what's going to make money and what's going to profit for them. So if you have the ability, I would encourage you to either encourage women identifying people you affiliate with, or if you are a woman identifying yourself, to possibly look into having a house birth or a home birth, even if you have an apartment. And I say this as a doula who works with other doulas who attend home births all the time. So I don't want you to think, oh, that's outdated. No one does that anymore. No, actually, home births have actually skyrocketed since the pandemic because women identifying are terrified of going to hospitals. So they don't want to be in the hospital where COVID-19 is more likely to be transmitted. They would rather give birth in their own house where they know stuff is sterile, they know stuff is sanitary, and where they know where stuff has been and who has touched what stuff because it's their environment, it's their space. Also, let's think about the emotional stress that a woman identifying person goes through when they're about to push a human child out of them. If you are in your own space, you're less likely to be stressed. And I've talked to, they call them nkungas or midwives, but I have talked to nkungas and they have said, we don't encourage our clients or patients to push out on an empty stomach. So that's another Western capitalistic approach, expecting this woman identifying person to be starving when she's pushing a human child out of her. How are you going to push anything if you don't have any energy? Such a backwards concept. I don't understand that. And don't even get me started on this idea of laying on your back pushing as opposed to using gravity. Again, another African practice. I can't. We don't even have time today. Okay. So the point I'm making to you is encourage women identifying people that you know to research house births or home births. Research that. If you can't do that for whatever reason, maybe there are birthing centers near you. Birthing centers are another step up because they still will allow you to be in control of what the birth looks like for you. And typically people who work at birthing centers or people who attend home births are more likely to adopt traditional African principles because they themselves are what we would call alternative care. Okay. So they're not pushing this capitalistic white agenda. They just literally want you, woman identifying mom and baby, to be healthy. So they're going to do everything they can to make sure those needs get met. Okay. If you can, as I said, would encourage you to consider researching a doula. I'm not saying that because I'm giving you my plug. I'm saying that because doulas literally provide 100% constant support and care. Why is that important? That's important because whether this might be your first child or whether this might be your 19th child, you are going to need some support. The reason they call it labor is because it's work, okay? It is serious work. Like your heart rate is elevated, your heart is pumping fast, you're sweating. It is work to push a human child out of your body. That's work. So you want somebody there who might rub your back if that's what you choose to, and you give them permission to do that. You want somebody there who's going to tell you, I know that this is hard for you, but I believe in you. You want somebody there who's going to remind you as your birth coach, they're going to remind you that you are capable of doing this. You know why? Because women before you have been doing this for thousands of years, and we are everything and that, and then some. So you need someone to remind you of how awesome you are. And that's where the doula comes in. Now, you might slip up and find a doula who doesn't care about their work, but I know some doulas here in Memphis, if you want to come to Memphis, who would give you the shirt off their back because they love what they do that much. And as I said before, they legit just want you to be healthy and they want your baby to be healthy. And they are the reason that I decided to become a doula, because I didn't even know what a doula was before that. So as I said, if you can get a labor coach like a doula. A doula will be so helpful for you. You'd be surprised. And even if this is your 19th kid, why does it hurt to have more support? More support is always a good thing, right? And on that note, as I said, maybe you can get an Nkanga and get a midwife. Maybe if that's something you're interested in. A doula and a midwife would kind of talk to you about being organized, and that's where developing a birth plan comes into place. Even if the plan doesn't happen, even if you don't execute the plan, you still have something grounded to kind of help you get focused so that you have an idea of how you want this birth to go, even if it doesn't happen like that. Because if you let my parents tell the story, I was 18 days late. So clearly I didn't follow my parents' birth plan, but that's okay. Every child is different in their own unique way. The birth plan is just to kind of keep woman identifying mom stable so that this person is able to feel as comfortable as they can, even if things may not go that way, because at least they have a grounded idea of how they expect or want things to go, as opposed to the birth just being disorganized and chaotic. And then look up some support groups. Because as I said before, support is one of the best things. It's the best medicine. It's almost as good as sleep or water. Support is always a good thing, especially when we're in a pandemic and you're giving birth in a pandemic, or if you were doing a home birth and this is your first child, or if you were trying to figure out which provider you really don't want to deal with anymore. Being able to go to a support group because you're new to the area, they might tell you about different doctors that they don't mess with for various reasons. And then that might help you understand, oh, I don't need to mess with them because they have that experience. And I looked on their website reviews and they were X, Y, and Z. So my point is just go talk to other people who are experiencing the same things you're experiencing. And if you yourself don't identify as needing that support, research those support groups to give it to the person who does identify. Because again, it's all about connecting and it's about linking up information and resources so that we can ultimately get organized to put an end to these mortality rates. And then of course, as we said before, last but not least, continue to do some research. Continue to open your mind. We encourage you to have what we call growth mindset because we want you to not be afraid of finding information. There's an old saying that says, the more you know, the less you know. And I have found that to be very true. I've been researching this for going on 7 years now, and there's still so much out there I don't know. But I am committed to it. I'm interested in it. As I said, I have a personal investment. But more than that, I'm sick of African women dying. And if that is the last thing that I do before I die, then I think that my life has been pretty good because I don't want that to happen to any more women identifying African women. It's just unacceptable. I thank you all so much for your time and attention today.
Fire! That's my daughter, y'all, laying it out there and really giving, I think, a very good analysis about several things that actually Shakur reminded me. You know, it's ironic you talked about childbirth and you talked about, you know, of course, the system of white supremacy, because just last night I was on the phone with your uncle Kitwana, and he reminded me, I had forgotten that when your mom was in labor with you, she was in labor 36 hours. And so I was there that whole time. And there was a time period where we were waiting and we were trying to decide if we were going to let them dilate or we were going to let them do a C-section because she was not dilating over a period of time. So I had been awake for a long time. And so I was sitting in the break room at the hospital being racially profiled by the staff there. And he had just gotten off of work because he worked graveyards. So he came there and he brought some donuts. And, you know, I haven't eaten donuts in decades, but I think I ate like 6 or 7 donuts that morning because I was starving. And they kept telling us we were laughing. It was like 5 in the morning. They kept telling us to be quiet, and we were rowdy in there. We were laughing and clowning and that because I was loopy, and I'm sure he was because he was up working all night. But that's just interesting because, you know, the more they came at us, the rowdier we got. And I know, you know, you ended up being born like at 10:04 the next day, and I know they were glad to see us go. But this is all critically important information, obviously, and I think that to end it out, to just kind of summarize, We just want to say that from our perspective, the problem here, as Shakura clearly articulated, is this system that prioritizes profit over people that we live under. And we don't know about you. You may want to wait for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Mickey Mouse Party or whatever one you're supporting to come with a comprehensive health care plan that's based on private healthcare corporations, which means there will continue to be a profit incentive for people to stay healthy. And I don't care what politician it is, as long as the system is based on a profit incentive, people's health is not going to be prioritized, y'all. And so, in other words, as long as there is a capitalist system in place that dominates healthcare, people's health is not going to be prioritized. So this is why we say that we have to organize for something better. We deserve so much better. We have to organize for a better system. And to us, that better system is socialism. And we're Pan-Africanists, which means we told you in the beginning, if you're paying attention, that we want one unified socialist Africa. That's our work. So we're not trying to create a socialist system in the United Snakes of America. This hemisphere belongs to the indigenous people, and they have every right to establish whatever type of system they see fit. But we will say that since we know that the continued wealth of this society is based largely in exploiting African resources, once we liberate Africa, this society will not be able to function with the wealth and privilege that it functions with now. So a lot of you who buy into the anti-communist, anti-socialist propaganda, we can't wait to see, and I'm not saying, I doubt that I'll live long enough to see it, but at some point, somebody will be here. And I know it'll be so interesting to see how people react when it becomes clear to them that this backward system cannot provide their needs. If you've been paying attention during the pandemic, that has been exposed. It only took, if you call a year ago, it only took about 30 days for companies to start going out of business because their functionality was never based on their strength and industrial hard work the way they train us. It was always based on you and I working for them and being exploited labor for them and them having resources they could exploit. And once that was not possible, they began to crumble like a deflated balloon. So clearly this system is built on that exploitation. It's not built on hard work or anything like that. And we just want something better. And so we, again, encourage you to join an organization that's working to create justice. And if you don't see an organization that you like, you don't escape responsibility. You have to start an organization. You have to start I wish they would shut up every Sunday from 4 to 5 PST organization. And you're going to need organized political education in that organization, as Shakur said. And we can help you do that if you don't know how to do that. And you define what organization is. Again, I use the same example all the time. Like, you can give 1 hour a week. You can decide to make calls for 1 hour a week. And you're going to talk to 3 or 4 people in that hour. And that's about 10 people a month that are being talked to about this work, that are being mobilized and organized to do this work. That's a significant contribution. Sekou Touré told us that bad organization is better than none at all. And so that's a great example of that. If you're talking to 10 people, those are 10 people that aren't going to be talked to if you're not talking to them. So we're not here to tell you how much work you need to do. We're just telling you that you need to do it and stop making excuses for why you can't do it. And the sooner we can get people in that mindset, the sooner we can solve these types of problems like healthcare. I don't know about you, but I'm not sitting around waiting on no Republican Party to do a dang thing for me. I'm going to organize and move us in the position where we can create a system where these things can happen based on the resources we're already producing. So we want to encourage you to come back next week and join us on the 14th, where we continue our focus on women. And we're going to talk about, or primarily Shakura is going to talk about the benefits of breastfeeding our children. This is a critical issue. African women identifying people, indigenous women identifying people have been doing this for thousands of years, you all, as the primary method, as the only method of rearing children. And yet in this Western capitalist society, it's kind of has a stigma, like women identifying people can't even feed their babies in public without it being an issue because of this backward patriarchal society. So we're going to talk about all of that next week. We invite you to join us, invite people, and we want to encourage you. If you want to join an organization, you want to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, you're an African, then please contact us, aprp-intl.org. There are many other organizations. If you don't want to join us, if you can't stand us, if you just listen because you want to develop your anger against us, that's fine. But the Black Alliance for Peace is out here. The Ajima People's Progress Party is out here. The Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, Republic of New Africa, Nation of Islam, all of these organizations are out here. African People's Socialist Party, all of them are out here. So you decide which one. And again, as we said, if you don't like any of those, then start the I don't like any of those, shut up organization, and do it that way. And we will support you 100% if you take that approach. My blog is Ajamu Umi's Truth Challenge at betterroad.me. I just posted an article there today. I encourage you to look at it. Asking you all, like, if these people that are claiming we're not from Africa and all these people taking these DNA tests, well, then we should be able to see DNA tests that Africans have that have no connection to Africa, because they're claiming upward of 50% of us here are not connected to Africa, which is insanity. But the problem should be solved. I'm waiting for the DNA tests that from an African that show me that your entire history has nothing to do with Africa, that you've been here thousands of years, not one or two people out of millions of people, but this 50% of us that these people keep saying based on the PhDs they earn from YouTube. So that's what that article is about. I encourage you to check it out. Hoodcommunist.org. We have a focus this month on women's history as well. So we want to encourage you. We're highlighting African women who have made contributions with their lives to forward progress. So we encourage you to go there, hoodcommunist.org. Study and listen to African revolutionaries, you all. And then finally, lastly, but certainly not least, we want to encourage you to mark your calendar for April 4th, the 53rd commemoration of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On that date, we will be having the virtual book release event for the 76-page manifesto I just published, entitled A Guide for Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. And what we're going to do there is assemble an outstanding panel of the Hood Communist Collective editors who are located all over the country. And you see that on the flyer there. We have our comrade Erica Keynes from Black Alliance for Peace, and Mac from Black Alliance for Peace, comrade Onya Samu from our All African People's Revolutionary Party, comrade Ghazi from Black Hammer Organization, and we have myself from obviously APRP as well. Shakur is going to be moderating us, and there's going to be an outstanding panel discussion, and then I'll read a little from the manifesto. It's designed as an addendum to Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. So we encourage you to get with people and read it. I'm so encouraged. So many people are saying, yeah, I'm getting with groups. We ordered several copies. A lot of people are getting it. And we want to organize groups so that we can put some of this that's in here into practice in these neighborhoods. And I've heard that from 8 or 9 different credible sources, and we are just getting started. So we want to encourage you to participate there, get that manifesto. Let's get organized, you all. Organization is the weapon of the oppressed, as it says there on the flyer, quoting our elder, eternal comrade, Kwame Ture. And we believe that 100%. So if we're not organized as a people, then that is the reason, you all, that we're not making the progress they want to make. Nobody's going to free us but ourselves. It's always been that way, and it will always be that way. Nobody is going to fix the problem but us. And so that requires us to be engaged and involved in order for that to happen. So we thank you for joining us for this hour. Again, the ancestors willing, we will be back here next week, same time, same imperialist stations, and we will be bringing you more analysis about how we get free. We want to wish you a great and wonderful rest of your Sunday evening, you all. We love you and appreciate you for joining. Get a guide for defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. Go to www.abetterworld.me for more information about that. Go to hoodcommunist.org for information. Go to aprp-intl.org for information. Respect and support independent, revolutionary African organizing and voices. Smash patriarchy, smash white supremacy, smash homophobia, smash capitalism and imperialism. Forward ever. And everybody, you have a great rest of your Sunday.